Bravo team is down.
Hi folks, I'm Ignatiy Vishnevetsky.
And I'm Alex Dowd.
We're here this week on the AV Club set.
Welcome to Film Club. This is the first Bourne film it's the first Bourne film in 4 years, and it's the first one in almost 10 to star Matt Damon as Jason Bourne again. But in the 10 years...
Jason Bourne again, is that the evangelical,
Jason
the
Bourne
faith-based
again.
alternative to...
But, you know, in the 10 years that he's been gone, that we haven't seen him, this is not a more vulnerable Jason Bourne. This is not one who is suddenly feeling the effects of the aging process. If anything, they've made him even more of an impossible Superman than he was before. So... The previous three films that he's in, the original trilogy, I guess you'd call it, basically took his identity crisis about as far as it could go. It said, you know, we're going to, in the first film, he has no idea who he is, but with each sequel, he learns more and more about himself. So that by the end of the third one, his past is no longer a mystery. He's not a man without a past anymore. The first line of dialogue in this new film is, I remember everything. He does not have amnesia anymore, so they have to give him some other reason, some other source of information that he can start chasing in this film, and it turns out to be the circumstances of his father's death.
And this is, you know, Paul Greengrass, the law and order of geopolitics. So you get like Greek austerity protests, you get Snowden, you get the collusion between Silicon Valley and intelligence agencies.
Surveillance state concerns. But all of that stuff is just kind of a veneer.
Greengrass is famous for his, well, basically he's a guy who's never met a shot that he wanted to frame. You know,
or a shot that he wanted to remain on screen for more than 3 seconds.
Yeah, he cuts fast, the camera is shaking. I'm watching the movie, I'm just thinking like, man, this could be probably a fun action movie if somebody had directed it.
Yeah.
You know, it's cutting all over the place. He's running and scowling.
I think Greengrass sees that as like a shortcut to urgency. That if the camera is unstable enough, if we're cutting enough, if we're creating this chaos in the streets, then that's going to substitute for a sense of urgency. But I just don't know if that actually really comes across.
And Greengrass, I mean, he gets ribbed by action movie purists for the style.
I mean, he gets a lot of acclaim, too.
Yeah.
Let's not forget. I mean, his last Bourne film, Ultimatum, won a couple Oscars.
I think it does work at times. I think that camera, you know, I think when the cars are crashing into each other, it works. If we're supposed to be following characters running through back alleys or a car chasing another car, it totally does not work.
Right. Well, you can almost break the Bourne action scenes into two categories. They're either people or cars in fevered pursuit, or they're these kind of suspenseful set pieces where Bourne is trying to escape a crowded area, trying to evade his pursuers, basically. And I think in those sequences, it really becomes clear that you needed somebody who could orchestrate this thing with a little more clarity.
You need a hero with a little bit of vulnerability. He is he's a superhero at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but he kind of always has been. And I think one of the reasons it worked earlier on, and I like the first film. I actually think the first film is underrated at this point.
Well, because it's not directed by Paul Greengrass.
It's not directed. It's directed by Doug Liman. His approach to the action scenes isn't let's make this as chaotic as possible, you know. And there are a couple of good ones in the first film. There's the sniper showdown with Clive Owen. There's the scene where he's scaling the side of the building early on. But one of the reasons that the first film I think works a little bit better for me than the sequels is that at that point he knows nothing about himself. And there's there's instant dramatic power in that. I'm a person who's woken up with complete amnesia. I know that I have these abilities, but I know nothing else about myself. As the sequels have gone on, he learns more and more, but the more he learns about himself, it's not like there's an accompanying growth in personality. He still remains this big, empty cipher.
This is really no different from a James Bond movie.
No, and at the height of their popularity, I feel like people were celebrating the Bourne films as like, these are like the thinking man's alternative to James Bond. But they're really, in a lot of ways, they're just as silly as the Bond films.
They're James Bond movies, except the main character hates his job. That's the big difference.
Well, they're James Bond movies without the flavor of James Bond. I would say with pretensions of seriousness.
This movie is just kind of trying to put villains and other villains against him, and it's difficult to care about any of it, or even what's going on, or whatever the big secret that's going to be revealed at the finale.
I think this whole thing is designed to kind of be a little bit of a corrective to the last Bourne film, the Bourne Legacy, which the whole idea behind Legacy was, you know, we're now going to shift to this other lab rat character played by Jeremy Renner, who's always going on about the chems. You know, he needs this injection to keep going. And I thought that one got a little bit of a bad rap.
Yeah.
Because it's actually pretty well, a lot of the action in that is pretty well orchestrated. And Renner, the thing about Renner's character is that there's some urgency there. I mean, he's basically, he's playing an addict in that film, you know? So he's sort of driven by these compulsions. And that provides something that the Damon Bourne films don't. In the Damon films, he's just this driven force of nature.
Now, before we went to see this, I went to another theater I caught up with, Café Society, which is the new Woody Allen film, the new old Woody Allen movie. And I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I'm kind of an Allen skeptic.
I am as well. You're sort of an Allen skeptic in the long haul, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I sort of got off the Woody Allen train around turn of the century, I would say, around the turn of this century, and have sort of been dutifully suffering through his films ever since. And I actually did I was kind of charmed by this film as well. And I think it's very purposely a film about somebody looking back on their life, looking back on who they used to be.
So the way the movie starts, it feels, for about the first third, it feels like it's just going to be a romantic comedy. You have Jesse Eisenberg playing this Jewish kid who comes to Los Angeles to get a job with his uncle, who's played by Steve Carell, and he falls in love with his uncle's secretary, who's played by Kristen Stewart.
And the third pairing between these two actors as well.
I mean, they're great together.
Yeah,
and they're great together here. And you think that that's all it's going to do, and then about a third of the way in, it just starts moving much, much more quickly. And then the movie actually covers many, many years.
The scope gets much larger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have him returning to New York. He becomes a nightclub owner. There's all of this other stuff.
The thing starts showing its ambition, I think, around the midway point. You start realizing that he's going for a larger point about the way that people change over the time, and about the way that the distance that grows between, you know, who you used to be and who you are now. I think Eisenberg is really good for that role because he can nail both the sort of naivety of this young version of the character and this sort of slicker version that we see later in the movie when he's become this nightclub owner.
It's still, like every Woody Allen movie, this feels like a first. Like somebody just wrote one draft of the script.
Yeah.
I'm ready to shoot. Let's go.
Right, and that's how he makes movies now.
Yeah.
I think he's just like, I have an idea, I get it on paper, then we shoot. He makes them out of what feels like habit at this point.
And so it's not that elegant in terms of structure, but then I find it poignant. It has so much overlap with his Radio Days, which is a movie that I feel contains some of just Allen's absolute worst, hackiest, Neil Simon material.
Yeah.
And just some of the best filmmaking of his career as well. Like, that's an incredibly uneven film. There are parts of it that are so incredibly expressive and beautiful, and I think far more than I think he, or to a degree that he never got to before or again.
I mean, there's a little bit of Hannah and her sisters in this too, I think, you know, with that sort of, you know, looking back on what we used to have and being bittersweet about it. I think I just found its melancholy to be attractive, if not overwhelmingly moving, at least. It provoked in me an emotional reaction, which is something I can't often say with Woody's later stuff, you know?
I felt the same way. It's bittersweet. I mean, I don't think Allen can overdo it, right? His camera style, and he's working for the first time with Vittorio Storaro here, great cinematographer. He's a guy who just gives great cinematographers free reign as long as it's basically one of four kinds of shots of people talking to each other. He's never been like a very expressive and like emotive. He's not like, Woody Allen is not an operatic stylist. No. And so there's gonna be a limit to how far he's gonna push this emotionally, but there is something like inherently very, very bittersweet into the sort of rhyming ending that basically you get a scene at the end with Eisenberg and then a scene at the end with Stewart where they're both at New Year's parties that I found kind of moving in a way that I really didn't expect.
Yeah, me too.